The scripture that David just read includes the last verse of last week's reading, the one that states a servant cannot serve two masters, God and wealth. But what David also read includes a few verses that join last week's reading to today's, the one about the rich man and Lazarus. I chose to add these verses today because I believe it's important to note that the parable that Jesus is telling today is specifically told to the Pharisees. We wouldn't know that without adding those verses to the reading. The Pharisees that Jesus calls money lovers, and their reaction to the previous parable, you can't serve two masters, was to sneer at Jesus. Other translations use the term deride or ridicule. So they were not very kind to Jesus. They probably used some of those ugly words that we talked about. But we, as friends of Jesus, to us as friends of Jesus, this action kind of leaves us with a negative impression of the Pharisees. And to be honest, in the Gospel of Luke didn't like the Pharisees very much, if at all, and he tends to put a negative spin on them throughout the Gospel. But Jesus is able to hold his own with these men, because all they really are trying to do is to guard the law as they understood it. Jesus says, "You are the ones who justify yourselves before other people, but God knows your heart. What is highly valued by people is deeply offensive to God." And Jesus went on, "Until John, there was only the law and the prophets. That is to say, up until John the Baptist began to preach about the coming of Jesus to redeem the world, the law and the prophets were the rule in the Jewish community. And this was the law that the Pharisees were attempting to uphold to the letter, but not so much to the intent of the law. God gave the law to teach human beings how to live in community with each other. But now, 2,000 years ago, Jesus has come. He is not only interpreting the law for the Jews and for others, he is also living the law. Jesus is preaching the good news of God's kingdom, a kingdom that's still based on God's law, but understood in a different way. All through his ministry, Jesus tries and tries and tries again to open the eyes of those who oppose him. And in the Gospel of Luke, that's the Pharisees. Jesus never gives up trying to change their minds, even on this journey to Jerusalem, and especially on this journey to Jerusalem where we are following Jesus. Jesus continues to teach not only the intent of the law, the heart of the law, often through parables, like the one we just heard. Jesus also at one time said something like this: if someone is open to understanding the parable, then there's hope. If they are closed-minded, that is, if they have ears but do not hear, or eyes but do not see, they will not change until it's too late, just like the rich man in our parable today. There was a certain rich man. Now, these are the same words that Luke used to open up last week's gospel, last week's parable, where we heard about the rich man and his dishonest manager. This rich man is one who clothed himself in purple and fine linen and feasted luxuriously every day. All of that being signs of extravagant wealth and maybe even royalty. Now, at his gate, I thought gated communities were a product of the 20th century, but it seems like even in Jesus' time, there were gated communities. At his gate lay a certain poor man named Lazarus. This Lazarus, is the only character in Jesus' parables that is ever given a name. Lazarus, who was covered with sores, and Lazarus longed to eat the crumbs that fell from the rich man's table. Instead, the dogs came and licked his sores. Two different worlds, completely, utterly, 100% different. One poor, one wealthy. Two worlds divided by boundaries, a gate, a wall perhaps, the conditions they're living in. But surely the rich man sees Lazarus as he comes and goes through his own gate daily, or does he? Does the rich man ever even see the man laying there? The man covered in sores? The man with dogs around him? Avery, you want to change to the next slide. It was in 2014 when this bench was placed outside St. Albans Episcopal Church in Davidson, North Carolina. Several folks, in driving by the church, called the police for fear that a homeless person, perhaps even a dead person, because it wasn't moving, was in their neighborhood and was a threat to the neighborhood. Davidson is a college town, home to Davidson College. Many of you may know Davidson College from their, at one time, great basketball teams. Davidson is also white and wealthy, but this is not any homeless person. This is Jesus, the homeless. It is a bronze sculpture by Timothy Schmalz, a Canadian artist who is using his art around the world to teach principles of Jesus' ministry. Now, one has to get close, has to be in proximity with this sculpture to recognize Jesus. And then he is only recognized by the crucifixion holes in his feet. Many people said this sculpture is criticizing and degrading Jesus. But is it? Jesus said, "Foxes have holes and birds have nests, but the Son of Man has no place to lay his head." This is the self-identity of Jesus. And didn't Jesus also say, "Come, you who will receive good things from my Father? Inherit the kingdom that was prepared for you before the world was begun. I was hungry, and you gave me food. I was thirsty, and you gave me drink." The people that he said this to said, "Lord, when did we do this for you?" And Jesus answered, "I assure you that when you have done it for one of the least of these, my brothers and my sisters, you have done it to me." Jesus, the homeless person. In today's parable, the rich man and Lazarus were as different as the citizens of Davidson, North Carolina, and the homeless person on this bench. Rich or poor, though, all human beings eventually die, as did the rich man and Lazarus. The rich man is buried, his final home, the place of the dead. And Lazarus is welcomed by Father Abraham. The rich man was suffering, and Lazarus was being comforted. The tables have turned. Even in his suffering, though, the rich man in his own mind believed he has pull and power with Abraham, because he shouts to Abraham, "Father Abraham, have mercy on me. Send Lazarus to dip the tip of his finger in the water to cool me off, because I am suffering." So now you see, the man has seen Lazarus, but only as a servant, only as a slave. He's still thinking about himself. He is not focusing on Lazarus or on God. And Abraham is so kind to this poor, rich fool, calling him child. But he goes on to say, sorry, but you were told over and over again by Moses and the prophets how you were to live, and you chose to ignore those teaching you. It's too late. There is nothing to be done for you. In following Jesus on his journey to Jerusalem, this parable is one of many where he talked about the dangers of wealth, the danger of ignoring those in need. But there's more to it, I think, because it's more than merely ignoring those in need. I believe that we can say that this parable is also about the danger of not seeing those in need. More so in our time and place, I think there's also another way of understanding those in need. So taking a deeper dive into this parable, one that isn't based on wealth and poverty, but rather on wellness and suffering, we can recognize that we as individuals and as the church are often blind to the suffering of those within our own church family or those we welcome into our worship. So let me explain what I'm talking about. I mean, there is no doubt that Jesus is talking about wealth and poverty and sharing wealth. But you've heard that. You've heard me say it over and over and over again, and Jesus say it. But I think there's more in seeing someone who is suffering. One of the resolutions passed at General Synod this summer was entitled this: Recognition of the continually evolving language of mental health. The continually evolving words used when talking about mental health. It was brought to the Synod because the language we use around mental health, whatever it is we're talking about, can be harmful or it can be uplifting. We can use language, as one of our young people said today, that causes mental suffering, or we can use language that offers comfort. The World Health Organization defines mental health as a basic human right, along with food and shelter. Mental health is a basic human right. And the United Church of Christ has gone even further to define mental health as a God-given human right. God says we all have a right to good mental health. So what does this have to do with the church, our church, or any church? Well, listen to this. The American Psychiatric Association Foundation understands that faith leaders, get that, faith leaders, you and I, the people that are in church on Sunday worshiping God, faith leaders are often the one that folks turn to in a crisis. We are those faith leaders. Not just me, the pastor, but every single one of you sitting there in those pews. You are faith leaders too. Might even be in your place of employment, or the place where you fish, or the place where you play pickleball, or who knows. Sure, we are asked to share our monetary wealth and our food, and that is definitely needed. But do we really see those we're sharing with as fellow human beings, as a child of God? The same often happens within our church family. Do we welcome those here who are having a rough time, no matter the cause? Perhaps it's a child with a substance abuse problem. Perhaps it's the parent of that child struggling with knowing how to support and help their own child. Perhaps it's a spouse who is worn out taking care of a loved one, who simply needs a non-judgmental ear, somebody to talk to. Perhaps it is a young person conflicted about their sexuality. My question to all of us including me, is this: do we see those folks? Do we recognize those folks? The ones who come to worship regularly and always say, "Oh, I'm fine." The ones in our family who don't make it to family gatherings, but everyone thinks, "Oh, they're just busy. They're fine." When we ask, "How are you doing today?" Is it merely small talk? Is it a common courtesy? Or are we willing to listen? When we ask that question, are we willing to hear, to take the time to listen to the other person? Are we willing to hear when they say, "I'm not doing so well today"? Maybe that person is suffering as Lazarus suffered with poverty and hunger. Now, going back to the death of Lazarus and the rich man, sometimes we think this is talking about the end times, that Lazarus suffered until he was in heaven, and that the rich man died and went to hell. And that may be true. But what about those who are living in hell on earth? Are we not asked to see them, whatever their personal hell is? Whatever their personal suffering is? Or are we like the rich man, oblivious to someone else's suffering? Are we willing to give our time? Not just our money, but our time to another person. In stopping to listen to others, in changing the language we use to talk about our mental health experiences, we also give up our human need to label others, to judge others, to tell them what and how they should be. For when we truly listen to others, when we let them have their feelings, when we let them describe how they are feeling, what they are experiencing in their own words, we begin to see that person, and we begin to see that person as God sees that person. For God knows when someone is suffering, and God expects us as his hands and feet on earth to do what we can to relieve that suffering. When we listen to someone, we validate that person as a human being. We validate that person as a child of God in all of their being, the good and the not so good. Do you see what I did there in changing the language? Most of the time we would hear in the good and the bad, right? But what if we change the words to be with somebody during the good and the not so good times, when they are being good and not so good? It's not quite as negative, because we all have those not so good times, don't we? One more point. This week, I listened to a webinar from the United Church of Christ Mental Health Network. The theme of this webinar was addiction in families and how the church can support these folks. The number one thing the church can do was accept them into the church family without judging. Accept them where they are and how they are with unconditional love, without requiring, in this case, them to be in recovery or to be in a 12-step program. Accepting them as they are and where they are. This week, we will be sending out the ballots for approval or disapproval of the open and affirming covenant for our church. Open and affirming covenants were originally begun as a way to say to those who identify as LGBTQ+, that they are welcome into the full life of this congregation. Over the years, and as our draft covenant specifies, the use of the phrase open and affirming has expanded to many identities. It means we see you. We see you as you are and where you are, and we welcome you. You are a child of God. We walk with you in this journey, in the good times and the not so good times, through all of the experiences you have in your life. For me, this week, this parable of the rich man and Lazarus is about so much more than wealth and poverty. It is about seeing each other, recognizing each other's suffering, whatever it may be, accepting each other how and where we are, and walking each other on our shared journey home to God. Walking with each other on our shared journey home to God. Amen.